the arts allow us to find an in-between space where I can be in a feeling experience and a thinking experience at the same time, where I'm not too overwhelmed by my emotional experience of the trauma or the violence. But I'm also not too Brechtian, not too stuck in my head thinking about what's happening, but I'm able to live in this place of, I feel this, and I'm aware of my feeling and my experience of this thing that I'm having.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ronee Penoi, and I am the Director of Artistic Programming and Interim Executive Director here at ArtsEmerson. One of the reasons we were very excited to have this conversation is that there's sometimes a misconception that to me, these timeless instruments of storytelling and interpretation are they're reserved for more youthful pursuits, let's say. But throughout history, as many of us know, they've often been, or I should say consistently used as tools or avatars, you could say, to be a physical representation of a person, character, or concept. But what they help us do is to examine and relay deep human truths, universal journeys, and perhaps our psyche as we tell stories, both of others and of ourselves. So with that, I'm excited to dive into this conversation with this fabulous group. And I want to introduce our guests. We have an amazing group of panelists who work with puppets and masks in very different ways. Dr. Jason Butler, we have with us, is an internationally known drama therapist who we are lucky enough to have here in Boston at Lesley University. He is the editor-in-chief for the Arts and Psychotherapy and the former training director for DVT Montreal, a satellite of the Institute for Developmental Transformations. So Dr. Butler, can you tell us a little bit about your work?
As Ronnie said, I'm a drama therapist. I'm not a professional in terms of theater and in terms of working with puppets and masks, but using puppets and masks is one of the key things that we do as drama therapists. I'm very interested in how we can use creative means to engage in complex conversations, how to represent ideas and concepts that are difficult to talk about. And so this conversation is very interesting to me. I also, puppets have been a part of my existence. I think it really came to the fore during the pandemic when I was living by myself. And I think that people who were Zooming with me soon found my collection of family. The puppets would have their own lives and their own placements throughout the view of the camera. So certainly finding my own relationship to that externalization is something that I'm resonating with.
Oh, I wish I was Zooming with you right back then. That seems very fun. Thanks, Jason. We also have Professor Felice Amato. Felice, yeah. Thank you. Felice Amato from Boston University, who has a special focus on applied puppetry, masks, and arts research. Professor Amato, can you tell us about your, hoping you can speak a bit about your teaching and research, and also a bit about the year-long conference that you recently created and chaired?
Sure, thanks. I teach at Boston University. I'm actually in the art education department, and so I teach classes there where I infuse puppets and masks. I have a class that I teach called Contemporary Issues in Art Education, where the students make masks in response to the themes that we're talking about. And I think that they discover that they're really amazing tools for that, because they really activate like both interiority, but then also this kind of encounter with the external world. And my goal in creating that class or infusing it with masks was the idea that a lot of people do art, they do masks in their art education classes, but a lot of us aren't prepared to actually teach your students to use the masks. And I think that's just such a fundamental part of them. They're not objects, they're really phenomena. Same with puppets. And I also have another class that I teach that's about making your art class more accessible to more students. And I try to infuse hand puppets into that class as much as I can. And one of the things I really like is I am continually pushed to learn. And so lately I've been trying to learn more in that class about hand differences and grip differences and things like that, because obviously that becomes really important when you're teaching about accessibility and animation and just kind of the core of animation.
Yeah.
And then I have been able to teach some classes that have been focused on puppets and masks for the rest of the university. I have a class that I teach called Thinking Through Puppets, where students visit Boston University labs and then create puppet pieces to convey what research is done in that lab. And so a variety of things. I think I tend to have a kind of jack of all trades mind. It's just things. Sometimes it pulls me in different directions, but I think ultimately it keeps things interesting. And I did host it was a year-long 4-weekend conference during the pandemic, so it was all on Zoom, with the theme of women in masks. And we were able to have about 80 different contributors, like people did artist talks, people were on panels, we actually had Deborah Hunt and one of her colleagues from the Eve of Abolition, and this was when they were just developing it. So they
That's
spoke.
amazing.
Yeah, so we had a whole year, and from that, I've crafted kind of a digital humanities project. If you Google Women in Masks, Boston University, and we're trying to continually develop a large database, pedagogical resources, and we do host periodic events, many of them on Zoom, the good and the bad of like being able to access international content. Like we're not together in a room, but somebody can speak to you from across the globe. So so that's a little bit about me.
No, that's incredible. And it's funny, that's making me think of that another point conversation we could have at some point is both the wonderful ability that connecting online offers us and also how tricky it is to both create, engage, watch archival videos of performing arts and what that does and the opportunities and challenges. So just already brainstorming for future. But that's fantastic. And Deborah Hunt, for those who don't know, she played the villain, correct? Yeah. So the wonderful I didn't even say this. The antagonist of the piece, the prison warden, if you remember. So.
And I think the other person was Suheli
Yeah,
Rodriguez.
Suheli.
Yeah, and she was the other person who spoke, who was the more of the rebel, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm. Who is just phenomenal force of nature.
Yeah, amazing.
Love Suheli. Amazing. Thank you, Felice. So Veronica Barron, hello, is the executive artistic director of the Puppet Showplace Theater, Woot Woot, in Brookline, where she leads the organization's vision and community impact. Though she is a classically trained theater artist, heck yeah, she credits the Puppet Showplace Theater as integral in making her the artist she is today. So Veronica, can you tell us a little bit about your pathway to puppetry?
I sure can. So some interesting crossovers here. I started out as a performer. I was trained at BU at the College of Fine Arts in the School of Theater, and I did a program that was really about weird work, you could say, right? It had a lot of different angles. Like it was like, oh, do you want to make work with masks or with really visually rich things? Do you want to collaborate across disciplines? So it was this very open-ended conservatory program for training theater performers. They didn't actually have any puppetry. They just had a lot of things that were really adjacent to puppetry. And then I found myself, beginning to specialize in new works, in things that really mixed disciplines. And eventually I found my way into making a little 10-minute clown tragedy that it had about 20 seconds of puppetry in it. So in this clown tragedy, there's a pivotal moment where one character becomes a puppet and then it's out. And the artistic director of Puppet Showplace at the time, my friend and colleague Roxana Myram, saw that piece, said, that has puppetry in it. I'd like to have that at my theater. And, she started to book us for festivals, and I ended up benefiting from the New Works support programs that Puppet Showplace runs that I now am responsible for stewarding. Puppet Showplace, we've been around for 50 years. This is actually our 50th anniversary year now.
Yeah.
We have this little 100-seat theater, and I'm really proud to be reaching all of the children and families that we reach, all of the adults that we reach through our adult programming, and I'm also especially proud of our artistic investment programs. We have an artist incubator program, and then we also have a creative residency for Black puppeteers, which incidentally, on the eve of abolition, Day Hernandez, one of the performers, workshopped a section of that in our first 2020 creative residency for Black puppeteers. I myself sort of came up through the incubator program and things like that. So I really, it's a great delight to me to be relatively new in my director role at an organization that really shaped me personally as an artist, and to see how can we deepen and grow that impact for other artists going forward.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I also love that puppetry in so many ways, it's such an ecosystem and a community, right? So there's very rarely this sense of proprietary ownership of like, okay, well, this puppet company works with these people in this way over time. It's very much the individual artist will be collaborating with different people over time and form different relationships. And then at this particular moment, it's shaped here. And I love that even the On the E family is, already coming up very organically in this conversation. We didn't plan that. That's very cool. What I'm going to do is share some questions. We have so many, and I want to get to all of them because I'm such a big nerd. And we may, at a certain point, I'm going to turn it over to allow our wonderful audience to get to ask some questions. So we'll do a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll wrap up at around 7:30. So, first question. So director Laura Foote of our upcoming production of The Life and Times of Michael Kay, she often speaks about what she calls the precise relationship between the puppets and the puppeteers. So I'm curious if one of you would like to speak about the connection between puppet and practitioner, or a mask and the wearer. So what have you observed about the effect of the object on a person? And I might, Felice, even ask you to start if you don't mind, because I know that there was something you said actually just before we started about it not being an object, but it being
A phenomena. Yeah. Sorry, I've had a little bit of a.
Oh yeah, we're all dancing.
Okay. Hello. Well, I made a few notes. I didn't want to be a deer in the headlights here, which sometimes happens. But in response to this question, I was thinking about. I'm a huge fan of Ingvild Espelli, whose Moby Dick was here last year. Amazing piece. But I got really interested in her work about 7 or 8 years ago. Her piece Ashes, and then a piece that's still to this day is has really impacted me as a piece called Chambre Noire that she did about Valerie Solanas, the woman who shot Andy Warhol in the late 60s. And a beautiful piece. Hopefully she'll tour it again sometime. But I think more than maybe some of the larger work that she's doing now, some of those pieces where there was so much interaction, really embodied interaction between a puppet, a life-size puppet, and a human actor animator really it really highlighted this sort of notion of kind of a relational animation in which the personality of this life-size puppet and the personality of the actor animator really become developed through the kind of shared movement. I'm thinking a lot about the scenes where the aging Valerie Solanas, the story is sort of told from her sort of deathbed at the end of her life, and kind of flashbacks with her mother, who's sort of this timeless persona, and is kind of caring for her and yet never cared for her, so really actually not caring for her as she is dying. But there's just a way that the touch, this kind of careless touch of the mother, the kind of narcissistic, kind of self-absorbed way that she kind of gets onto the bed and rolls all over the place and, is barely just acknowledges, the body of her dying daughter, and yet she acknowledges enough to kind of bring this subtle animation into the character. But really the two of them together are what let us know who each of those characters are. And so I think that's an example of what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Veronica, Jason.
I mean, I wasn't planning to bust these out right away, but I just feel like if we're going to have a conversation about puppetry, I think I need to touch something to tell you about this. And I didn't bring any materials, so I've salvaged these from the downstairs. So just to think about the precise relationship, I mean, one of the things that I think is really exciting about puppetry is that it's difficult to lie with a material object, You can, I could move this box of water, and there's nothing that I can do about how I animate this box of water that would make it exactly the same as the way I move this tissue, So I could, as the performer, think, oh, well, I think that this should be a really kind of character, and this is the material that I'm working with, And so there's something about, I have to really tune in if I'm the puppeteer with this material and say what does it do, And like, this is a tissue. It's really similar to a paper towel, but it's not the same, you know? Like, actually, would anybody be willing to like put your hand up and say, like, what is a difference you notice between these two things? Flexibility.
Yeah, we heard flexibility.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
And
it
the
has a
tissue
little-
floats.
There's weight. The weight is different.
Weight
The material. Absolutely.
and
Right.
material.
Yeah. Yes, the movement is different. And I think, you know, again, just thinking, I had fun grabbing these. Like, this one has a little bit of sound, right? And then this one's my favorite. This one has sound, it has movement, and you also know what this is. So you can't unsee this. You know what it is. It would be different. The way you feel about this as the performer or as the viewer is different if I had a plain piece of tissue here as opposed to this beautiful object. So I just think that this is a, you know, when I think about the particular relationship and what I find so rewarding about working with puppetry, it's that fact of not being able to lie about the material that's in front of you.
And I'll just say that what I love is that these objects pull us into that in-between liminal space. They bring us into that imaginal place where it's me and the object in a not real place, in a fantastical place. So not only is this, am I with this rigid sloshing thing here, but suddenly it's like, oh, where are we? What is this? Where does this place? And then that takes me into a place from a therapy standpoint where aspects of me get illuminated or elevated or played with in that nuance that's brought about by what the object is itself.
That's so interesting. I mean, it feels like there's such a, in the object, an invitation, both to like imagine something different, invited by the object to take you to a different place, and also to play in a way that I feel like as adults we rarely get to. And whether you're watching it or whether you're experiencing it yourself, there's something about opening that up in a way that is generative that often we don't get to. That's really that's incredible. I also wanted to, I guess, a second question is that Laura, the same director of Life and Times of Michael Kay, she talks about her actors going through what she calls a spiritual warm up. So, you know, as we're talking about objects kind of offering something about or introducing a different kind of part of you in a different way, that there's this new kind of reality created. I'm curious how spirituality fits into this. I know that there's some aspects of mask and puppet work that are historically tied to it, but you know, how does spirituality for you interplay with some of the practices of mask and puppet work today, or doesn't it? I know for some folks it does, and maybe others not.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay.
And not everybody has to answer every question. So.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about this, and I think for some reason the idea of aging, illness, and dying came to mind, because I think some of the most moving moments in puppetry I've seen are the creation of a character that is in kind of that, I guess, liminal space. And I think puppets do that really well. I think I was just watching, in order to share this with my students again, Handspring has a beautiful short video about their work with breath with the National Theater. And they have an aging character, and they're using also an accordion for the breath sound, and they're working back and forth to try to figure out how to create kind of this labored breathing. And you really realize, I mean, when you're working with breath and not breath and barely breath, et cetera, like you're right on the edge of life. And I mean, with puppets, it can be right on the edge of life because, well, we're suddenly animating them, but it can also be right on the edge of life because that's the content. We're really bringing attention to the fragility of our bodies, of our, yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I can keep going unless anyone wants to jump in.
Well, I was just
Yeah.
thinking that, how we define spirituality, what do we mean by spirituality is a question for me. I think sometimes that gets us in the dangerous territory of cultural appropriation. And how are we, saying, oh, I know that this shaman does this thing with this thing that I call a mask. And so I'm doing the same thing, and that becomes problematic. However, I think that in this heightened state that theater creates and that we create in relationship to the object, that heightened place for me resonates with an idea of spirituality. That resonates with me with this idea of, oh, this is a place where there is possibility. This is a place where there is a certain kind of reverence that happens, a certain kind of potential in this place. So I think that absolutely when we enter that liminal space and people are watching it and people are witnessing the thing that's happening, it resonates with other rituals that exist within our lives and within our worlds too.
No, and thank you for naming that. Well, I think that there is both sometimes that risk that we've seen, and that I think that there is with the companies that we've been talking about. I know there's real attention and rigor to that in particular, and also I feel like I've seen such examples of masks in particular offering a pathway to be able to show things that are. And I guess this is jumping ahead to a question. Oh, look, I'm cheating. That you can depict traumatic things or violent things in a masked situation that sometimes the full person, the full body is it's too much or it's too grotesque, or it's too loaded. And something about, I saw an incredible piece in Under the Radar Festival in New York this January called The Horse of Jenin, that was at La Mama Theater, and it was a Palestinian artist talking about a particular childhood experience he had. And as he talked about these different characters, he would, after speaking a bit of comedy, he would put on a mask and kind of take on I don't know, it felt a little bit like bouffant a little bit, but larger than life kind of depiction of that moment. And there was something about that allowed you to connect even deeper to the personal stories of the characters. So I guess to turn that into a question, I'm, and this is something we saw on the Eve of Abolition as well. Puppets and miniatures can illustrate difficult scenes of violence that humans inflict on each other, not even just our own traumatic experiences. And that has a different reaction. So I guess I'm curious from all of you and your different perspectives, how can puppetry unlock these scenes differently? So, I mean, we see it sometimes, we kind of know, oh yeah, that seems to work. But how do you find why, and can you speak a little bit to that experience?
I wanted to read something that I wrote.
Yeah, please.
I knew I wouldn't be able to just come up with it off the top of my head. So
I think we'll allow it.
Okay, so this is again from Chambre Noire, the piece by Ingvil Despelli, and this is a little excerpt from something in a forthcoming chapter that I wrote on it for a book called Making Meaning in Puppetry, which will be out this year from Routledge. So I spent a lot of time on this article just really trying to capture why this piece had such an effect on me. So one of the most powerful scenes in the show references Valerie's sexual abuse by her father. After Dorothy has pried herself away from young Valerie, the child is alone, reclined on her side of the bed. For this scene, the designers crafted a toy-like vision of menace, locating us in the child's world by translating the horror into a child's visual language, an oversized, misfit hand, which appears on her white dress. The hand is a stand-in for the abuser, and by extension, the abuse. It's not realistic. Rather, it's reminiscent of a poorly crafted handmade toy. Borisova, the designer, describes arriving at this artistic solution through a mix of happenstance and reflection. The only glove we had was a garden glove, so I painted it. We actually wanted just a big hand, but we didn't want a foam hand because even if it's very realistic, it will be stiff. We wanted movement, but something bigger than Ingvild's hand, which would be too small and too delicate. So again, the material played in our favor. We were still thinking, can we keep this glove hand or not? But I put on some nails, and so it's really in between realistic and strange stuff. The scene also employs a further form of fragmentation that is only possible in material performance, literalizing the complex process of dissociation, which some abuse victims used to escape experiences they cannot integrate. After the hand appears, Valerie's legs detach from her alert but motionless body. Lying on her side and staring straight ahead, her legs float away, alienated from her body. As they become separate performing objects, the audience's attention is split between their aerial choreography and the child, whose body now ends abruptly at the hem of her skirt. Eventually, the legs return, drifting back to Valerie's body on the bed. For a moment, they leave a visible gap before Valerie lifts the skirt of her dress and the legs reattach, if not reintegrate. One might be tempted to say that Aspelli has wisely chosen not to show the abuse. However, this assumes that showing means witnessing as an adult bystander. Aspelli has shown the abuse as experienced dissociatively by young Valerie. So that scene will stay with me forever, I think.
Yeah, and I can see why it's important to name very specifically what happened. Yeah. Others.
Just taking a moment to hear that in. I mean, the thing that came to my mind when you were posing the question, I think that puppetry really, it can depict violence that is actually enacted by humans, but it also can just represent creation and destruction really well.
Yeah.
Which isn't only about literal violence enacted by humans, but it makes me think of this sort of broader, the way that like when children play with a block tower, they then want to knock it down, like there's a sense of like, if you see an object like this on stage, and actually we just at Puppet Showplace had this lovely show by this duo from Montreal, Puzzle Theater. They have a show called Disposable where the only material is tissues. And we do, it's not too much of a spoiler to say, like we see a lot of things happen with the tissues and we do definitely see them rip, it's like we see the transformation. We see the transformation of like a paper that has come to life, that has feelings, that has an experience, and we see the transformation into something else, another form. And I think that's really something that you can't do with a human actor in the same way. You can't, and there are great reasons that you wouldn't want to in the case of representing certain kinds of violence and things like that, but you can't take an actor apart, which is good, but it's one of those things where if you were, just thinking artistically about why puppetry, a question that we ask often in the field of like, why is this puppetry? Like, should this, would this scene work equally well with two actors just talking to each other? Why does it have puppetry? And one of the reasons can be how well puppetry can handle bringing something to life and then transforming it quite physically into something else. It can come apart, it can rip, it could, if it was legal to have an open flame in a theater, it could burn. There are all these things that the material world can do that I at least think, and this is where, I don't have an appropriate degree to really comment on this as far as my training. I just have a felt sense that does something for me as a human. There are some stories where watching that transformation in a material way, it feels like something to me. Like it felt like something in that show I described to watch the tissues rip, I feel like I got to toss it to...
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you're describing in this amazing scene that you've described as well illustrate just the power of the arts to represent. So much of how we engage or work through experiences that we've had is to have some sort of representation of that experience. And words or thoughts aren't going to cut it. And so that's where the arts become so necessary. There's a few drama therapy students here and a drama therapist in the audience, so I'll become a little bit didactic for a minute, but there's a concept within drama therapy that I think is really helpful to illustrate this. We call it aesthetic distance, but it's the idea that the arts allow us to find an in-between space where I can be in a feeling experience and a thinking experience at the same time, where I'm not too overwhelmed by my emotional experience of the trauma or the violence. But I'm also not too Brechtian, not too stuck in my head thinking about what's happening, but I'm able to live in this place of, I feel this, and I'm aware of my feeling and my experience of this thing that I'm having. And so I think about this example of the sexual abuse that you described that is just aesthetically, from an artistic standpoint, so brilliant in how it's capturing that. But it's also making me feel and think about the experience of this individual that I'm watching. So I think that and what puppetry does and mask work is it so objectifies, it puts its we're able to manipulate it in so many different ways because the human body isn't there. We can rip it and we can't rip the human body. We can do these things to the object that we can't do to the human. We can't have a person's legs fly off in the same way without a huge budget and all kinds of things.
Or a lot of CGI.
Exactly, that need to happen there. But when we bring these projective objects into this space, it gives us the opportunity to aesthetically create these concepts and these ideas of experience that if we were putting the real thing on stage, it would be horrific. But War Horse, some of these other productions that represent violence in a way that make me able to sit with it, but not just sit with it, but to think about the sitting, to think about what I'm experiencing in that space.
Well, and I think too, this might be, there's so many different places we could go. And I mean, I'm thinking about empathy coming out of this. And it's one of the things that I hear maybe most often about puppetry is that it really allows you to have a different kind of empathy than seeing a human person going through it, because there's so much less specificity, you could say, in some ways. So maybe as we continue, I would love to hear your thoughts on empathy in relationship to this. But I actually wanted to pivot slightly to say, to ask about the who. So I'm like looking for the question and I can't find. Anyway, I'll find it. So I had an experience speaking to someone that I think I mentioned to some of you before we met, that puppets aren't for me. They're for children. This is something that is juvenile in some way. I'm curious how you, if that's something you've also heard as well in your work. I mean, while obviously there often is an audience, of children for puppetry, not exclusively by any means. So I'm curious if you can speak to that critique or that perception or stereotype about puppets.
As someone I'm curious actually, how many people have been to Puppet Showplace Theater before? Could I see hands? Oh my gosh, yay! So Puppet Showplace, for those who haven't been, is a small storefront theater. It seats about 100 people. Sometimes we can squeeze like 110 in if they're really small. It turns out 3-year-olds are really little. So, we reach about 20,000 people a year through puppetry at our little theater, and with the shows that we send out to schools and to festivals and things like that. And of our main audiences, people assume, if you've ever been to Puppet Showplace, like you look around, it's designed to be a friendly place for very young children. Our core audience is between ages about 3 and 9. But all of those young people come with a grown-up. And the grown-ups are actually also part of the audience, So, I think that it's true that puppetry is very effective for children. It's amazing. Some of you have probably had this experience, even maybe playing with your own children or children in your life, that, I notice it happening all the time after our weekend shows when children and their adults come up to the stage to meet the puppeteer, maybe get to see a puppet up close. And invariably, if there's a puppet talking, everybody's talking to the puppet, And adults do it too, actually, but children do that very, very easily. It seems very natural to them to speak directly to the puppet. Like it's very easy for them to enter into that world. And it's also, I watch the adults that they're with also getting something out of it. So, I really appreciated like a dad the other weekend put it into words where he was kind of like, oh, this is so nice, for the kids, but yeah, but also me. Like, what a great way to start the day. I feel happy now. And I'm like, great, And I just think that there's a few things at play here. Like, to me, there's a piece of it that somehow we currently I don't know, are obviously even here in this place and this time, we have many cultures that we're bringing into any room that we're in, so it's not as if everyone is coming with the same cultural underpinnings of what puppetry is. But I do think it's common, in the US now to think like, if it's good for children, that means it's only for children. We do a little bit of, I perceive a certain amount of quarantining children off from the rest of people. And I am not a fan personally. My experience is that a lot of things that are good for children and work for children are also good for people of all ages and work for people of all ages. So to me, there's a little bit of that, othering of children in that belief, and of course, there's some material that's not appropriate for children, and that's fine. And I think that the same things that make puppetry magical and engaging and alive, and masks as well, those things play really well in material that is very clearly for adults. So, I think that for me, at least, there's a real sense of there's nothing wrong with saying it's wonderful for children and that it's a child welcoming space. And as I mentioned, at our theater, we've set it up so that it feels welcoming to small people. It's not the case that the entire world feels comfortable for a 4-year-old. So we're trying to make a space where they can come in and have a first theatrical experience that feels welcoming to them, but it is meant to be welcoming to their grownups as well. And I just think that, I don't know, I personally would love to see a cultural shift where we can think a little more intergenerationally and think about spaces that, again, there are some topics and some material that's not appropriate for children. And also, I actually think there's a lot more experiences that we could be having where each person is going to have it on the level that they are, whether you're 4 or 40 or 80 or whatever. So I don't know. That's my initial thought about that notion.
I appreciate that. And I also, you're introducing to me this, a thought too, that I think it is also feels like it could be regional or geographic. That I think it's maybe more of an American notion to sometimes think about it as, that's, something more for kids than maybe some other countries. I'm not, or other cultures, experiences, et cetera. So before we open for questions, I do want to make sure I get to a question about materials. So something that has been true of many of our past puppet productions, but I'm thinking very specifically of On the Eve of Abolition with Ahitarte Papamachete. You might notice from the title that their masks and puppets were often crafted out of found objects, paper mache, sometimes things that others had discarded. So the objects were made of their environment, right? And they had particular resonance to the story that was being told on a number of different levels. So I'm curious, in your experience, how you found that the materials used in puppets and masks are reflective of their cultural background, current use, and what the choice of materials can tell us about the creator. I think that, Veronica, you already showed us in so many ways the power of materials and how you respond to it. And I'm curious, I guess, diving in even more, what does that choice of materials kind of do for this process and the relationship?
Well, this is going to be a little bit of a detour, but okay.
Please.
So I was thinking about with this question, an artist that I really admire is a puppeteer dancer from Turin, and she, Silvia Battaglio, she created a piece about Bluebeard, the horrific fairy tale about the young girl who's married off to this character Bluebeard and then discovers all of these dead wives in a room that she's told not to look in, or many rooms. I think there's multiple stories. But anyway, so she created this piece, but it started out because they had given her about 4 of these old marionettes, like old big wooden marionettes from Italy, beautifully jointed, like very kind of fluid way of working, great relationship with gravity, but they were in complete disrepair, no strings on them anymore. And as a dancer, she started to use them to create a new kind of movement vocabulary. So she would take, the puppets all represented these wives, so she would take one and sort of like see how it sort of landed on the floor. And then she would kind of take this kind of gesture into her body, and then that would become sort of a whole part of the of this performance. And so I guess it's a little bit different than what you're asking, but at the same time, she's taking this kind of historical part of Italian culture, which are these beautiful wooden marionettes. She's taking them as they come, with one missing a foot, a lot of them with kind of the floppy necks that no longer really kind of have, and she's using them to become these wives, but then also to inform her own body as the dancer who plays the protagonist.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's exactly answering the question, truly. No, that's powerful. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking of it kind of going in the opposite direction, the other direction in terms of what does the material, what does the dramatic material call for? And I was reading Life and Times of Michael Kay, and there's just a couple of sections I wanted to pull out if people have seen pictures or clips of the puppet within it. But I'll just read a couple of quick parts here. You are no soldier, Michaels. Michaels is the main character. You are a figure of fun, a clown, a wooden man. You're like a stick insect, Michaels, whose sole defense against a universe of predators is its bizarre shape. You are like a stick insect that has landed, God knows how, in the middle of a great, wide, flat, bare, concrete plain. You raise your slow, fragile stick legs one at a time. You inch about looking for something to merge with, and there is nothing. Why did you ever leave the bushes? And later, with Michaels, it's always seemed to me that someone had scuffled together a handful of dust, spat on it, and patted it into the shape of a rudimentary man, making one or two mistakes, omitting one or two details, but coming up nevertheless in the end with a genuine little man of earth, the kind of little man one sees in peasant art emerging in the world from between the squat thighs of its mother host, with fingers ready hooked and back ready bent for a life of burrowing, a creature that spends its waking life stooped over the soil, that when at last its time comes, digs its own grave and slips quietly in and draws the heavy earth over its head like a blanket. So as I was reading these and thinking of the imagery of the puppet, I'm also thinking about how the material gets called up by, well, how the material gets called up by the material. that the thing we're representing also can call up how we represent the thing within the production.
I'm really glad you read that because it offers such a different dimension. I mean, adaptation is something that I think it's some of the most fun conversations. And how well did they do that adaptation? How did this medium express it differently than this medium? And puppetry does really offer both the marriage of liveness of it happening right in front of you, and a lot of the freedom of not having to be limited to the human body as the form of representation, right? And there's so much in what you said that I now just wish I could bring up Michael Kay, the puppet in front of you, to go, oh, I really see and understand that connection. So I guess you'll just have to come see the play. No, that's really exquisite. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to make sure to open up for a few questions from the audience. Would someone like to be a brave first goer? Yes. Oh, and actually, do you mind waiting for the microphone so we could capture your lovely voice? Thank you.
So I hope I have the name right, but Veronica, one thing that I was curious about was whether you had thought through that little presentation of different objects, because it kind of interests me about different kinds of talents, like your ability to kind of see the life of things. I mean, I don't see the life of things. I don't, I see the utility of things, but I don't see the life of things. So I'm wondering if that was just something that hit you today or something you thought about in advance.
I thought about that while I was in the bathroom before coming up on stage. So
Spoken like a true artist.
Yes. But I do, you're reminding me of I think it's much like the visual artists I know who do a 90-minute sketch of a figure model and it's amazing. And that sketch didn't take them 90 seconds, it took them 30 years. You know what I mean? Like the reason that they made that sketch in 90 seconds is because they've been drawing figure models for 30 years and then that one just came out really good, So there's something about, my experience of being an artist that I think it applies, I'm working in the arts, obviously, but I think it applies to people who are doing it in a hobbyist way as well, that you're training your ability to sense. Like, I even just think about the fact that we talk about feelings like emotions, but they're feelings, like they feel, they touch like something. And I think that a lot of art forms make us encounter the world a little bit differently, And I think I'm just reminded as well of, Jason, when you were talking about being at home in the pandemic alone, I was also living alone for most of the pandemic. And I was teaching an object puppetry class at the time online for Puppet Showplace. And during that time, it was a great solace, actually, to teach that class. So object puppetry, for anyone who doesn't know, is when you use an unaltered object as a puppet, sort of what I was just demonstrating, as opposed to, I could put a rod on this, I could put a face on it. But object puppetry, I might just find out, what does this little sloshy guy do just by himself, And I will say that I think that my students particularly reflected on that during the pandemic, many people being stuck at home alone or with the same small group of people, that we were looking around our homes and saying, like, what is that object and what is its personality? And suddenly it feels like, when I gave the direction of like, now look at your object and now I want you to let your object look back at you. And then suddenly you're like, oh, well, I too am being witnessed. And I'm being witnessed by that exit sign. And I'm being witnessed by this piece of paper that I just ripped. And I don't know how it feels about that. Like it's, I think it's a way that certainly I've been trained and practiced to try to think of, to be open to touching an object, watching it move, feeling or hearing it sound and seeing like what its personality might be, even that mask, what an evocative object, that it has a utility, but it moves in a certain way too, So, that's been part of my life as an artist, but has come in especially handy at specific times, especially in that isolating time for me. It really became very real as a practical tool to get through my day and feel like I wasn't alone in my house,
Thank you. It was so interesting to be invited into another person's way, another artist's way of thinking about the world, which is different from the way you might think about the world or I might think about the world.
I also just want to encourage to anyone who thinks that it sounds appealing, I just encourage you to just consider touching or holding or moving an object for 10 seconds longer than you normally would. You might be surprised at what you find.
You might find that life you said you don't see in things. I think having a conversation with that mask might be interesting. It's quite a statement.
I think we might have time for one more quick question. Yes, please. We just want to wait for the microphone.
So actually, this is connected to your question and what you, Veronica, was sharing about object theater and what it means to simply pay attention to an object and establish a relationship with that to see what happens. I also use puppetry in my classes. I teach Spanish, and I use it for language learning. And it's fascinating what happens when you give students a puppet or an object, and suddenly it takes a life on its own, and the student that usually is shy and afraid of expressing themselves because obviously they don't want to come across as this or that, or they don't want to make mistakes, and suddenly they forget about that because it's not about them anymore. Suddenly it's about, oh, it's the puppet talking, it's not me. So there is this, you can let it talk because, I am free from that responsibility. And I would like to ask this question, to all of you, because I think there's something that has to do with us being hardwired to learn through play. And that's why we find that children are the ones that, they are our teachers, right? In the sense that you see how, they touch the objects, how they engage when they are, baby strollers, they put them in the mouth because they need to taste it. But also the way they walk, because hey, this sounds different from that sound over there. And it's the way in which they explore the world. It's the way in which we started to explore the world. So we were engaging with our environments, with the objects around us. And then, as puppeteers or teachers, or simply people wanting to find, like new meanings in objects, it's a little bit like awakening that part in us that maybe through years of schooling and life challenges and so on has been buried, and suddenly all the playfulness and the sense of wonder and mystery and awe comes back. So I guess the question is, well, it's in us, right?
What I might even do is use that beautiful provocation of it's in us to say to the three of you as we're needing to close, but what do you feel is still in you that you want to share about this, about the power of puppetry, of mask, about the sense of possibility to find that play, to find that spark of imagination? What do you feel like you haven't been able to share that you want to make sure is said before you leave today? No pressure.
No pressure. Well, this is when I was thinking about this last question, and I was thinking about. I think that one of the reasons that puppetry is possibly has such a powerful effect on us is that it is really activating these kind of like deep, kind of neural, developmental biology kind of aspects to ours, like for example the pareidolia, like this drive within us to see a face in things that have no face, or a body where there isn't a body. And I feel like in some ways, because it's activating these kind of very old structures in us, that it isn't just that we see a puppet, we actually, I guess, also reflecting what you were saying, we feel it. It's almost like a magnet that sort of pulls us, because it can't just be about the cerebral part or the cerebral response. It's much deeper than that. So I guess that kind of responds.
Yes. No, absolutely. Yeah, anything else? Take it away. We have a very polite panel, everyone.
I frequently say that the play is the medicine. I think that to the question that you're posing and the observation that you have posed is that for change or growth to happen, we have to be able to take a risk. We have to be able to step into that place of unknown, that place of possibility, that place of something else. And the arts, play, puppets give us an opportunity to engage in that, to think about something different for your students, to, oh, the puppet can talk, I can't talk, but I have permission because there's play here to do something different, to do something other than what I usually do. And I think that that's my wish for people, is to find the play, to take Veronica's challenge and go home and have a conversation with something at your desk or at your table, right? To figure out what newness, what new things might show up if you take a step into that play space, to start flexing that muscle, to start using that experience of what does the world around me have to teach me, or what new opportunities might show up if I were to start engaging in that as well.
And I would say my sort of closing thread that feels like it's weaving throughout riffs on that as well. There's, I think that question about like spiritual presence of puppetry really has stuck with me throughout this conversation. And, so like, in my personal life, I'm a Quaker, and Quaker faith and practice is, at this point in time, Quakerism is like a multi-denominational religion that like the core idea is that whatever divineness is, or light, or God, or whatever language you use, is in all people and all beings and all things. And I think about that a lot in my experiences of puppetry as well. And there's this real sense of loneliness or detachment that I think I hear, I witness around me, that that we are, in our current life. I just think even about like what it's like to touch the screen that I, like many of us, find so captivating. It's like it's a hard experience that doesn't always satisfy something. So when I think about this idea that there is some kind of spirit that is in all of us and all of the things, for me, there's just something about like there's a pathway available, like with everything and all the people. There's a potential pathway available to connect in that sense of aliveness, and that really feels meaningful to me. It's something that it's like I can think about it, and it's a cool thought, and it's also a felt experience that I have, that like, especially if I personally feel like I'm getting off track, or swirling off in my head or something like that, there's this real sense of like connection is available through the aliveness of people and things. And I find a lot of value in tapping into that as an artist, but also as a person.
Yeah. I love that, and I love that we're ending with an invitation to all of us, that this is something that we can all be invited to imagine and participate in with the world around us, looking within and looking without. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. I've been really enlightened and inspired by this conversation, and hope that it encourages your own sense of supporting initiatives and projects that incorporate masks, puppets, and other interpretive tools.